Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming along. Like, seriously, thank you for coming along. Yeah! So today, we've got the MVP panel and talking about using Yammer for employee communications and engagement. Now, really chuffed to be on stage with these 5 amazing MVPs. And I think what we've got today is we've got a really passionate group of people that are really feel or love not just Yammer, but what it does for the people in our organisations. My name is Scott Ward. I'm the moderator today, and I'm a geek in this space, which is why I'm here. But it's not about me. So what I might do is we just go down the line and get the guys to introduce themselves, and then we can kick it off. Martina.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Martina Grom. I'm an Office 365 MVP from the very well beginning, when not even the product was launched back then. And I really like to have Yammer in the Office 365 space. What's wrong? And I live in Europe, in Vienna, and hopefully we have a fun time the next 75 minutes.
I am Melanie Hohertz. I am Digital Productivity Lead for Cargill. And I was responsible for rolling out our Yammer platform originally 6 years ago, back in 2012. And it has grown to, when I checked last week, a 41,000-person network. I am a 3-cycle Microsoft MVP, mostly for Yammer, but I have expanded out into OneNote, OneDrive, and Teams. And I'm delighted to be here today because Yammer is my thing.
Should be on.
Hi, I'm Kevin Crossman. I'm the IT service owner for content collaboration at Juniper Networks. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for Yammer and Teams and other Office 365 products and communities. And I spent a lot of time on this slide. That's why I wanted it to be shown. It was a pain to put all those photos into the template, believe me. Anyway, I also have a couple sessions later this week in the theater sessions you might want to check out. Wednesday, 5 o'clock, I've got a Teams and Yammer. Believe it or not, they're not the same. And important use cases and key differences, but really, it should be a lot of fun. Also, less fun, but maybe still important to some of you. On Thursday at 10:10, I've got IT using Office 365 to increase IT user engagement, where Yammer and Teams and SharePoint will be discussed. So, that's it.
Hi, everybody. Loni French. I am the Digital Internal Communications Manager for Guardian Life Insurance in New York City. I've been there about 4 years, where I manage our Yammer network, our intranet, which is on SharePoint Online, and also OneDrive, OneNote collaboration and training. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk about our Yammer experience and journey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Dolzine. I work at EY, Ernst & Young. I'm based in the Cleveland office. I've been there for about 3.5 years, and I work in knowledge management. I'm an Office Applications and Services MVP as well, and I'm honored to be among some of my favorite people right here on this stage. Melanie and I have a Yammer Mythbusters presentation on Wednesday morning that you're going to want to see, so there might be some explosions. Come on by Expo Theater 5.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Look, we've got a really good sized room today. So for those of you that aren't aware, this session is also being recorded. And because of the people we've got here today, as we're going through this process or this conversation, if you've got questions or comments, please shout them out. For those of you that are listening, it's a very crowded room. There's about 5,000 people. It's standing room only. And Sati is in the front row. So the pressure is on. Anyway, look, I thought we might kick off the conversation with just a really simple question around why Yammer. And I think it's a really pertinent question at the moment because there's this massive proliferation of technology. We're seeing all these new sort of products coming into the market, and not just within Microsoft, but competitive products. Why should anyone care about Yammer? Like, what is it about Yammer? Anyone willing to pick that up? Kevin?
Well, we had a kind of a situation earlier this year at my company where we used Yammer for a specific change initiative. And why Yammer was because it was the best tool and probably the really only tool that would have made this work effectively. So what it was we were doing kind of a company rebranding. We changed our colors and our aspects of our logo. And we did the hip Silicon Valley thing and decided to name our employees and colleagues. So we're not Googlers, we're Junivators. And it's pretty cool. But anyway, so they did a whole thing where they wanted people to take a picture with their favorite Juniper swag and post a picture. Can you imagine trying to post a picture on SharePoint or Teams? It really wouldn't have worked well, especially because you wanted people to tell the story about why it was important to them or whatever. So Yammer was used. They had a special hashtag. They had some giveaways for all the people who participated. And so it was a really good way to be able to see your colleagues around the world and some of the things that, historical objects or even some of the newer things that we give away at conferences like Ignite, because Juniper is here.
Nice. Very nice. And Melanie, I've come over here because it's a big thing and I'm a short man. So you were talking before about within Cargill around some of the things that you guys have done around using it for strategy. Is that right?
Okay, so I want to kind of back it up a little bit because I really want to, I'm going to apologize in advance. This is probably going to take a minute or two to unwind, but I promise it'll be worth going along with me. So the thing is we have an incredible self-service analytics movement at Cargill. And I would not use that term lightly. I'm a little bit of a skeptic and a cynic, but this is a really awesome, awe-inspiring thing. And it is Yammer that's made it happen. And it is only Yammer that could make this happen. And I'm going to back this up for just kind of a minute as far as what my philosophy is as a person who owns both Yammer and Teams at Cargill. And then I will just tell you that you really have to go to Kevin's presentation because I've seen it before. And it is just amazing. So the way I mentally classify Yammer and Teams and the way I often explain it to other people is I say, do you know who? It's a very simple question. Do you know who? Because if you're in Teams, you know who's in that team because you share a deliverable or you share a project. You share a dashboard. You're working on something together. You know who. Now, if you don't know who, you need a network. You need Yammer because maybe you don't know who can help you. You don't know who has the answer. You don't know who else has done this before. You don't know who else is doing this right now. You don't know who's interested. You don't know who cares. And that is when you need a network, and that is when you need Yammer. And the other main use case for Yammer that I always have to tack on is, oh yeah, and it's also really great at really large communities. And that is where I get back to this whole self-service analytics movement. Because since the last time I was here, a year ago, I've been slapped across the face with this like some big wet fish going, hey, we built this cool thing, Mel, and you didn't help us. Let us tell you about it, because I didn't help this happen at all. I just heard about this a few months ago. About 18 months ago, there were 3 incredibly passionate data nerds at Cargill who had a crazy dream. They said, what if every business owner who had a data question or a data need didn't need to go through the painful trudge that I think will be familiar to almost all of you here? Well, do we have a data team? Who's on it? What forms do I have to fill out? How am I going to fill out this form and say, what's going to be the ROI of this data question that I haven't even answered yet? Oh, you mean now we got to fill out requirements? And now it's going to be sent off to some person who I'm never going to meet on the data team who will execute this maybe the right way, maybe not. And when we get our result in a few weeks or a few months, is it even still going to be relevant? Because things have changed in the meantime. People have changed. The questions have changed. The market has probably changed by then. Can we maybe do this a little bit better? And what they said is, what if instead of having a data team, instead of having a center of expertise, which they now openly call a single point of failure, what if you have a community of expertise? What if you flip the model and instead of saying, hey, we're going to send a data person out to answer your business question and make them try to understand all the business context of 20 years of layers in your supply chain. What if instead we say we think it's easier to raise all the boats and to teach everyone in our business how to answer data questions and how to use data tools and encourage people who might not have even thought they could do this before to come into this space, to really provide incredible value to Cargill with more data-driven insights and better decisions. And this has grown from a 3-person nerd vision, and I say that with love. This has grown into an ecosystem of Yammer groups where the Power BI group is more than 11,000 people today. Alteryx, 5,000. Tableau group, too. More than 15,000 people in this lovely little Flow community. And I would keep talking about this for hours if you let me. I've got like 2 pages of notes on it. But together, this community can do such incredible things because not only do they solve problems for each other and share the amazing stuff that they build, whether you're a beginner or an expert, but they leverage that power of community to remove other obstacles in the organization to get what they need. Think about sometimes the cultural and the political barriers to getting access to a data set, or even the search involved to discover all the data sets that are available to you in a global company like Cargill. And that is the work that's getting done. And it doesn't happen without a network. It doesn't happen without Yammer. Julia White said this morning that every company is a technology company. Yammer is what's making it happen at Cargill.
That's great. Thanks, Melanie. So it sounds like we've got... very nice. So it sounds like we've got, like from Kevin, we're talking about things around brand and really identity and starting to develop a shared identity. Melanie, we've got things around like capability and building capabilities at scale and fast tracking and building that agility. Martina, what are your thoughts on why? Like why Yammer?
So what I like around Yammer is that Yammer is a communication channel where you don't have any hierarchies. So you speak from eye to eye, you can ask anyone, you don't have to care, is it a manager, an executive, or anyone else. So this is very important. And also Melanie mentioned that last year, Yammer is the universe of an organization. And Teams, compared to that, is like your neighborhood. You know whom you are talking to. In Yammer, you have the whole universe and you are asking a question and you get answers back and you get engagement back. And I live in a cultural area where this is quite difficult in the beginning because we are not the best persons in giving feedback. I always adore US people because they are so good in giving relevant feedback. When you hear that in Austria or in Germany, it always sounds like you are complaining about something. And I learned a ton in being a better communicator and to engage more and don't be sarcastic or anything else in my communication because people don't get that. People don't know how you wake up and have a headache or anything else. It's just around the communication channel. And Yammer is also, it's very easy to adopt. So people know what they do in Yammer. They sign in. They know, oh, here are my groups, here are my interests, here I can communicate. And it starts from the beginning, and the engagement also starts from the beginning. And this is also very important because you don't have to explain a lot. You get the communication running very soon and very fast in the beginning.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So it sounds like, I mean, the culture piece is one of the things that comes through again and again that we're hearing a lot. Loni, you've talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion and Yammer's role in sort of breaking those boundaries to start to bring in or to amplify the opportunities from a diversity and inclusion perspective. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So at Guardian, we have employee resource groups where we bring like-minded people together around a certain topic or certain interest. So we have a women's leadership group, we have a Pride network, and we also have a Black Employees Network. So these are all very new networks for us at Guardian, and diversity and inclusion is really important for us, not just of how you look or your background, but also of thoughts and identities and coming together. And we have Yammer groups that support each of these ERGs, and it's really important to connect everybody in the company, not just in your neighborhood or in your region, to be able to be part of that community and feel like an ally or have a safe space. And so when we first launched the Pride group a couple months ago in June, the leader there reached out in the Yammer group to talk about why they needed more help in different regions. And so they were looking for support. And so they reached out and they found somebody in one of the regions that said, hey, I really want to be part of this. I have a story to tell and I want to help you. And so without Yammer, that was really, like that connection would have not been made. And it really gives people a safe space to go and feel part of a community.
And what are some of the groups that you're seeing that are coming up as part of those sorts of things?
What types?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, the Pride Network for LGBTQ and the Black Employees Network, and then our Women's Leadership Network. So we're also reaching out to veterans as well, and maybe Latin American group too next.
I mean, are these intentional groups, or are they just springing up?
These are intentional. The Women's Leadership Network actually was grassroots before. That was our first employee resource group, where it was a bunch of women and men coming together to find, to give voice for women in the organization, and that turned into one of the first resource groups. So that started out grassroots through a Yammer group, which became more formal through our D&I program.
So it actually became a program. So it was a conversation that then became something more formal.
Exactly. Yep.
That's really cool.
Yep.
Yeah. And Amy, would you tell us a bit about how does that? I know EY's got a good story in this space too.
Yeah, of course, at EY, diversity and inclusion is really, really important to us. We're an enormous company, 260, 70,000 people around the world with all kinds of needs and concerns and families and life. And we have a number of the same kinds of groups that Guardian does, and most of them are grassroots that are started by the particular employee resource group that wanted to start one up. We've got a professional women's network and Today's Families, which is for people who have families of, which is most parents have families, but it also talks about aging parents and life that when you're in the middle, which a lot of us are. We also, I attended a presentation last week, and somebody mentioned how important it is to bring your weird to the place where you work, because everybody has a weird. Everybody has something that's unique about them, but when you find that other person who's just like you can build trust across service lines, across sectors. You can find a way to build a bridge. And so we've got groups in our network that maybe you wouldn't think that a company like EY would have, but we've got like weekend bakers of EY and the pets of EY. And those aren't the groups where people spend all their time. It's not like that's where they're only doing that, but it's a way to bring them to find somebody they would not have met before, and maybe they'll work with them on a project, or they'll reach out to them because they find out something else about them because they were able to celebrate their weird together. Or in one case that happened, recently, a pet that someone had been following passed away, and everybody was like, it's a support group, because people really care about their pets. So I'm not saying that's the only reason people use Yammer. It's just one way that you can bring people into a network and make them feel included by providing them with some context around their life, no matter what it is. And if it's as strategic as full diversity and inclusion, or something that's just as simple as, hey, I baked this really amazing cake, everybody check it out, that kind of thing. So bring your weird.
It's brilliant. I think because quite often in organisations too, there's a tendency to want to slam down those conversations that are off topic, right? But actually, what you're talking about there is they're really good at connecting juniors with seniors, or people in one office in with another office, and building those communication pathways that later get used for work purposes. Yeah. So there's more to the diversity and inclusion story, I think, than...
Yeah, I was just going to add similar example around wellness too. So we have a wellness group at Guardian, Live Well, and a lot of people talk about what they're doing on the weekends. Are they biking? Are they hiking? There's one gentleman who puts nutrition tips every week, literally, and it's like this whole recipe of how to stay healthy around a certain topic, and people really like that. But it's a great way. We found people connecting, hey, let's go to a bike ride at lunch together or after work, and it reduces those barriers like Martina was talking about.
So what do these groups actually add into the Yammer community? Like, why do they add value, or what does Yammer bring to the equation that we couldn't get from a notice board or an email string or something like that? Like, what is it that makes these Yammer right for these groups and vice versa? Anyone?
So I'm going to talk about this extensively in my theater session coming up on Wednesday. But, you know, we have a very interesting culture at Juniper. We have a lot of people that are on email, but the connections you make over email just are not the same as when you can have more of a multimedia with photos and things like that. And obviously, one of the key things with Yammer in particular is that if I was interested in one of these groups, maybe because I was in the closet, say, I might want to see what's going on in that community before I joined it, or something like that. And you can actually go through and see what's going on and maybe talk to someone offline or whatever, because you can see the conversations in Yammer because they're open and public, as opposed to me having to join before I can even read the messages. So, or be able to catch up with the old messages before I was hired, or whatever. So I think that's really the open factor that is really the key feature set for Yammer that makes it so powerful compared to other products in the suite.
This is really just a minor example, but it didn't even come to mind until now, saying that from the perspective of someone who has been a mother, the first time that you are realizing that you are going to go through this incredible, grueling physical transformation, and then you're going to be handed this new person and this new life to look after when maybe you've, like me, killed any number of household plants in your lifetime. So the thing is I can remember when I first noticed that there was a working mothers group in our Yammer network. And people were talking about things as intimate as, can I really bring a pump to my position, to my work, and, in this plant? Is there a private, can you point out a private place where I can use this thing? Has anyone experienced these crazy physical symptoms? Can anyone recommend a provider? Can I eat this and can I not eat this when I'm pregnant? These are things that we're talking about in Yammer. It was amazing. And I have to tell you that one of the posts, which I still remember because it made such a vivid impression on me, is an incredible woman in middle to upper management who I had always looked at as this unstoppable force of nature. I would never want to cross this woman on my worst day. And what she did was she went into this Working Mothers Network group and she posted about how she had had a really hard week, and it's always a challenge to juggle work and family. And sometimes, some days, this was her phrase, you just got to have cold cereal for dinner. And she ripped aside that veil that we all wear at work, that we can always handle it, that we can always keep it together, that this is no sweat, right? And instead, she made it clear that she's struggling just like the rest of us, and I cannot walk by her in the hallway every day without just, I have to resist the urge to hug her.
Nice. Thanks. Yeah, there's a great story. I remember working with a police organisation a number of years ago about some of these groups that you just don't expect. And they had a bit of a tragedy happen in the force. So what they did was they created this group around mental health and wellness, and started having conversations in there and talking about some of the resources that were available for people as police. And what happened was that there were some people in the group that were members that hadn't actually participated, and through that watching the conversation, realised that they were starting to feel the effects of PTSD, and actually, as a result, then went and got counselling as a result. So there's all these different things that you don't realise, people that can benefit from this stuff, be it upstream, downstream, and we do start to feel connected to these people, which actually then starts to talk around, like that's lovely as a group, but as an organisation too, there's this need to feel that we need to engage people. So it's good to have them to connect on things that is important to them, and diversity and inclusion. But then the next layer, or one of the other layers, is really about engagement, and how do we actually then start to take it forward. Martina, just throwing it across to you, what do you think engagement means when it comes to Yammer? It's a term that's thrown around a lot. Have you got, just elaborate on some thoughts there. What do you think engagement is? What does good engagement look like perhaps on Yammer, or how does it actually start to manifest in that platform?
So from engagement, and there were amazing stories among that, because Yammer makes you more authentic in your communication, and you see you are speaking with people and not with other managers or anything else, that people have also feelings around that. And through employee engagement, what I see a lot is that Yammer can help you to get a more clear view on the organization and how it works and how it communicates and how the communicate channels work in an organization. And this is also something what I learn every day, because we are a very small company and we are not the traditional. We can work with Teams or Yammer or email or anything else, or we can just talk to each other if we are in the same office. But Yammer helps us keep up to date and get communications and get answers back from time to time, in the evening, in the morning, when people have time to look at that and give us feedback on how we are doing and what's our point of view in the organization.
Nice. And Amy, you were talking before, like when we're starting to get into the culture piece and the engagement piece, usually what it then comes down to is a lot of organisations talk about their employee opinion surveys or the surveys around it. You guys have, can you tell us a little bit about how EY is sort of blending Yammer and that measurement piece?
Yeah, sure. We don't administer our employee engagement survey in Yammer. That's not the best use. You wouldn't do a poll about that. But when we do have a global survey where we evaluate overall employee engagement, which is done in a different tool, there are leaders who take the results of their specific subset and will share the results of that subset in their particular Yammer group associated with that business unit or that group, and invite questions and comments on it, or celebrate successes, or we raised this percentage over last year, or we've heard your concerns, hashtag ask us anything if you'd like to learn more. So we are able to build further engagement around the employee engagement survey by talking about it openly in our Yammer network. But the other thing that we do, which is we also have this really complicated survey tool that is kind of hard to use, honestly. It's really not that intuitive. So we have built a group around support for that tool, because it's not something that you can really use without asking a friend. And often it's the first time you've used it, or you didn't use it, you haven't used it in 6 months. This group allows you to ask a question, and it's very well monitored and very well tracked, and people are always offering, here's a screenshot, here's how I did this, here's how I helped with that. And that also helps just with any kind of tool you roll out. This one just happens to be about surveys. We have a group that you can see the engagement around the use of a particular tool. We also have a group for every single tool that we roll out in the Office 365 platform. So we've got a group about Teams. We've got a group about Planner. We've got a group about all of them. They all have a support group so that IT doesn't have to answer every single question, that users in the community can help each other answer their questions, and it's a way to help everybody be able to see what everybody's questions are and respond to them, and help us build that community of engagement. So
it amplifies some of the work that the survey is doing. So engagement becomes a narrative that is beyond just a short email and a link that you then fill in and it disappears into a black hole. It actually becomes something that is living within the organisation.
Yeah, it amplifies the conversations more. Yeah, nice. For sure.
In terms of just on engagement, I'm fascinated by, like in organisations we go into, there's often, you can tell really quickly if the employees are highly engaged or if they're kind of switched off. And usually in those organisations where they're switched off, Yammer communities don't tend to do well because they are the canary in the coal mine. But those where there is high engagement, there's usually some really dynamic leaders that get it and are doing things in different ways. Just wondering, just throwing it out to the panel, have you got any examples of leaders that are doing things to drive, like that are engaging in more effective ways? Or what have you seen from the organisations that you're in, or the leaders that actually do manage to get people in and buzzing around certain topics or things that matter?
I'll just add, piggybacking on the employee engagement survey and into the leadership question, we do our employee survey every 2 years, and so after the results come back, managers get them. We have a lot of questions around strategy. Is it the strategy of the company? Is two-way dialogue? Is information getting cascaded down to the group? So always after those surveys, I see a lot of requests back into my team to say, hey, how can we use Yammer to help support those answers? So people have, one leadership team in IT actually created a superlative game where they, it was about people feeling more engaged in their department. And so they voted through their Yammer group to say, who is the person most likely to take you out for lunch or to help answer a question or to welcome a new person. And so they could all vote on people, and then that was highlighted in their town halls. So they did that announcing and voting through Yammer and then used it to support the culture through the department.
Nice.
So within the last fiscal year, Cargill decided to completely reboot its strategic priorities. In other words, to really try to change a lot of the conversation about who we are and what we do and how we go to market and how we create value. And as you all know, for these kind of campaigns, often these sorts of messages are things that are determined in central command, and then they are winged around the world on the back of PowerPoint, and everyone kind of snickers a bit. You know, you may read off the script, you know, at your next employee meeting, and then it goes into the circular file and no one thinks about it ever again. So our team had watched some of the success we had in using Yammer as an engagement channel back in 2015 when we ran one barn burner of a recognition campaign that I may end up talking about later. And they saw the crazy level of engagement we had with that, and that has been the bar ever since on how you engage employees in a corporate communication. So of course they decided to re-leverage Yammer to try to get across, to get people to not only hear, to break through the noise and hear this message, but get them to actually engage with it and then get them to localize it, to make it make sense in their own priority, which can be very different. We have mines, we have plantations, we have lab facilities. You know, these messages are going to need to be localized to make any sense at all in many of these places. What does that really mean to us? And so they had a lot of Yam Jams, and by Yam Jams, I mean 24-hour follow the sun, long list of people available to you in a wide variety of global regions style Yam Jams. They recruited people from around the company to do a game show style model where they literally did question and answer game shows with our C-suite, which those videos were then also posted in Yammer as well as being advertised in Yammer on how you could appear on the game show. And once again, just like our 2015 recognition campaign, we did an ice bucket style challenge. And if your memory doesn't extend back to those lovely videos where people splash themselves with big cold buckets of ice water in order to give money to charities, let me just say that it's very similar to a chain letter, except for good, not for evil, right? You're supposed to not only respond, but you're supposed to send it along to a bunch of other folks. And one thing that the campaign owners for this particular strategic priority campaign did was they asked me to go into my Yammer network analytics and track how they were doing against the bar of the 2015 recognition campaign. Now, I'm glad to say that the recognition campaign still owns the crown, but they came darn close. And it's Yammer that makes these messages local and relevant, because this is the way that you get your leaders to publicly own and endorse and to localize these messages in a way that is really visible and transparent to the ranks.
The leadership conversation is one that comes up a lot, so I think it's worth just exploring a little bit. I know it's not necessarily on our agenda that we're talking about, but I think it is something that does, like I said, it comes up a lot. And I mean, it's tremendously valuable talking about the campaigns that leaders have run. What other examples of leadership have you guys seen that you think are exceptional or have really made a difference into the culture of the organisation? Kevin?
So at Juniper, we set up, and I was in partnership with our communications team in marketing to set up an Ask the Executives group in Yammer. This was part of a larger initiative where they were doing kind of like town hall meetings or Skype broadcast style meetings on a monthly basis to try to walk the walk in terms of letting anybody ask C-suite questions. But of course, you can't just set up the group because you have to do all the planning ahead of time. And obviously, one of the things that was key there was that they had to get buy-in from the C-suite. The marketing team had the initiative to monitor the group so that if someone asked a question and didn't necessarily mention the particular executive or whatever, that they could then go in and, poke them or whatever if they needed help with an answer or just this is something you need to take a look at or whatever. And we've even had some of those where it's, started with one executive and then another one and another one kind of chimed in, we each with their own perspective on a certain topic that maybe was broad and affected a number of business units. So, Yammer's been a very important part of this, continual global initiative to, have the, transparency with the executives and allow employees to ask questions and whatnot. And, it's not going to change our culture in terms of people asking from the bottom to the top, overnight. But you got to do it for a while before it becomes ingrained and people understand that it's safe to ask those kinds of questions. So that's how we're doing here with that.
Nice. That's really powerful. When what's really interesting, I think, is Martina, you go into a lot of organisations, so you get to see a sort of the current state of across the market, if you like. When you're going in and potentially talking about these sorts of things to leaders, where are they up to? Where is their headspace as it relates to Yammer? What's their awareness? Are they looking forward to it? Are they fearful? What's your experience of that audience?
I see a big difference between private-owned corporations and shareholder-owned corporations, because if you're a family which built the organization and so on, so you're probably in a hierarchy by design because it's a family-style organization. And what I see, which is extremely important, is executive engagement. Because if you have managers who think, okay, go play in Yammer, and it's just a playground where you can communicate, it's not going to work. And then I see other executives. I'm working with a company in Germany where one of the managers is the person who overshares. He films himself driving on the motorway and speaking about the company strategy and so on. And his team is so afraid to doing something wrong because he shares his whole life in there. And on the other side, it's also that you see that people want to make an impact in the company they work for. And this is also very important. You want to work in a company where you can influence a strategy, where you can make an impact in what you are doing, and you want to bring value in their organization. And this is really important because otherwise you don't get connected to your colleagues, to your company, and so on. You go there from 9 to 5, don't think, just work. And this is not how it works today. It's just around impact, influence, and so on. And look at us MVPs. We all love to share our knowledge. We do that for free. We love to do that because we believe that sharing knowledge brings us, all of us, in a better environment and in a better world in the end.
Nice. Amy?
A couple of examples from our network. Leadership engagement was one of the key use cases we came up with for when we launched our Yammer network. And one of the ways that gets executed is through Yam Jams, of course. A Yam Jam is kind of an open conversation that you have for a set period of time. It can be an hour, it can be an hour and a half, it can be a whole day. We've never done a 24-hour round the sun Yam Jam, but we have done, hour and a half Yam Jams. One or two leaders in particular have these kind of high blank Yam Jams, or high first name Yam Jams, where they schedule with their teams after they've had a series of other kinds of meetings, town halls or other, it's not the only way they engage with their teams, but, after they might have had a round the world kind of set of meetings, they'll have a catch-up kind of, hey, let's just you've heard from me around the world, here, now let's talk about what other questions you have. One particular leader had a whole hour and a half around work-life balance, and so people were able to ask a bunch of questions of this particular leader, and she was able to respond with how she manages everything, including she would often bring in help from other executives that she knew could answer that question better, or that she felt would have a better perspective on that particular thing. She would, mention them and bring them right into the conversation to answer during that Yam Jam. So all of that was just, it reinforces how open that particular leader was to being a real person and being authentic, which then in turn allowed her entire team to feel like they could be authentic and open as well. So leading by example, I think, really does show up in that way. So yeah, that's just another great way to just continually reinforce what your culture is. We care very much about sharing knowledge across our whole group of employees, and Yammer allows us to do that. And when leaders can demonstrate how powerful that is, it just amplifies how important that is.
The leadership piece is really important. I think the other part of leadership that doesn't get talked about a lot, but is starting to, is the community management function within organisations. Now, I happen to know that many of the people on the stage at the moment, to all intents and purposes, have that as part of their duties. I was wondering, can anyone start to talk about what are some of the unique challenges that come with trying to promote or to execute that role in organisations today? I mean, is it something that is the value of which is just universally accepted, or is it something that people are still jostling with? Where's that one up to?
It isn't something that's universally known or accepted. It is, community management is a very important part of rolling out any kind of change, once you've rolled it out, continuing the momentum of the change.
Why? Why do you think it's important?
Because communities, when they're getting started, don't always know the guardrails. They don't know the best behaviors. They don't know what you're trying to achieve. And a community manager, whether it's at the whole network level or at each individual group level, I mean, at a company the size of mine, we have groups that are 15, 20, 25,000 people, right? They are communities or networks in and of themselves. Each one of them has a community manager or two who's responsible for making sure that questions don't go unanswered, that when someone reaches out for help, there is someone there who might not know the answer, but they know the person who knows, and they can, through back channels, reach out to them and say, hey, Jill, I need your help on this answer. Can you pop into the Yammer and answer this question? So the community manager is the person that helps set the tone, helps establish the guardrails, helps understand what the purpose of that particular group is, which might be very different from the group right next to it. And the community manager is the one that can help make that happen. It is something that takes some effort and some continual reinforcement. There are lots of community management training decks that all of us have used, I think, in our networks to help train the ambassadors, you might call them, or your champions in your network to be better community managers. And many of us have shared those in the past in the Microsoft technical community, so we'd be happy to surface them again. But it's an important and valuable piece of your network, is making sure that you have a group of community managers who can help you manage it. So,
and throwing it to the group, if that is such an important function, surely then it's easy to have community management as an integrated part of your organisation, and it's a no-brainer. I wouldn't mind throwing it to either Loni or to Kevin, and I know Melanie's bound to have a few words on this one too. No, please, jump in.
Yeah, so sorry about my coughing. I think it's super important, and companies don't see the value of it right away. And I think where Yammer is unique is that it's one of the apps in the suite that needs that love and care more than others to get people into it, to develop the use cases, to help people connect what the work and discovery that will happen in Yammer to the strategy too. So for us, it's really about making sure that the ambassadors or power users, our community managers, really understand how they're helping their groups connect back to the work that people need to do, connect back to the strategy, how the discovery and connections in their groups help make the company stronger and more knowledgeable.
Yeah. The linking, that's brilliant. The linking to strategy, I think, is a really important piece, because suddenly if you've got people that are out there advocating activity towards the strategy, suddenly that becomes an easier business case to make. So what are some of the examples or your experiences of starting to facilitate that link? Because it's not always immediate between, particularly when we're talking before about diversity and inclusion and having those as healthy functioning communities or healthy functioning groups, and then having the conversation around, well, how does that actually then start to drive our strategy? What's the link? So how do you guys start to position Yammer activity with strategy? I know, Melanie, you kind of touched on it a little bit before around the campaigns, and Kevin, you did too, around the relaunching of the brand piece. What do those conversations look like?
Well, a lot of times I get asked as the IT guy for SharePoint and all this other stuff, is like, which tool should I use for this? And so, because I know all the things, I can give the pros and the cons. And hey, why don't we use this? Well, you could, and here's some reasons why it might work, and here's this other one you could think of working a different way. And what is your priority? Do you really want it to be one way, or are you looking for two-way? And if it's two-way, you're going to want Yammer, as opposed to email or whatever. So it's more about having a conversation about what the suite products are, and then obviously as part of that conversation, like I had with this, ask the executives, you got to know what you're getting into and plan for it and how you're going to support it with a leader or a community manager, whatever you call it.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Anything to add?
And maybe I'm wandering a bit off topic, and if so, that's something you should have all expected from me. But the thing is I had a really interesting scenario and an interesting thought recently, because about a little over a year ago, I was asked to give up my Yammer network and hand it off to someone else. And it was because I was taking on broader Office 365 rollout capabilities for corporate affairs. I was basically put in charge of modernizing the function. And they wanted me to not be completely dedicated anymore. And in fact, I was told that I was going to hand the network off to basically a young business analyst associate, and it would be 15% of her time. You can probably imagine how I reacted. But like a good team player, I went ahead and put together all the information and all the skills and all the training and handed it off. And then went off to do other work in other Office 365 areas for many months at a time. And in doing so, of course, I still managed to stay in Yammer, because like Amy's network, we have Yammer groups for every single Office 365 tool, because that's how users stay up to date with all the changes in these tools. But I wasn't looking at Yammer as its network admin anymore, even though I retained the rights in the title. I simply wasn't in charge of it. And she was in charge of the champions community, and she was in charge of its use and care. And so when she got a new role and abruptly threw this project back in my lap, and I hadn't been thinking with admin glasses on for half a year or more, I said to myself, oh my gosh, what's happened to this network? I haven't been doing this. Has it been okay? What's going on? I went into my tyGraph analytics, and I was really expecting the worst, because remember, this was only supposed to be a tiny percentage of her time, right? And I said, surely without me, this thing has fallen to dust. Yeah, that's hubris, right? So the thing is I'm actually feeling so much better about this now, because I believe that my network really went for about a year with basically bare bones support. No, regularly scheduled trainings, no care and feeding, no careful, pruning of communities, none of that stuff that I considered necessary to keep this a well-oiled running machine. And it is still kicking. It is 86,000 plus average trackable actions per month over the last 12 without me. And so part of what I have to say is we've been running Yammer since 2012. And after a while, don't we all kind of assume that the email is just going to work and that everyone has a base level understanding of how it works? And in a presentation here a few years ago, I was asked, well, what do you consider to be, when is your Yammer network first a success? And I said it was when your executives stopped asking for metrics from it. And now I believe your Yammer network is a success when you can neglect it for a little while. When it's almost like my kids. I like to say my kids came to a different area of development when they could be out of my eyesight for an hour and I didn't assume they were dead. Yeah. And now that's true of my network.
Martina, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, would you recommend that some of your clients that are new to Yammer, starting to get it moving, would you recommend neglect as one of their tactics for adoption?
Remember, this is on a maturity model, right? So no network endangerment, please.
What Melanie described is loss of control, and everyone is afraid of doing that. And the first thing is, when a network is alive, it stays alive. What I very often see is that a network who drives knowledge and is relevant to people really come back and engage there. If it's not relevant, they don't come back because they have other things to do. And this is the most important part. It's not about the tool. And we discussed today a lot about tools. Is it better to move away to another enterprise social network or anything else? And it's not the solution to go into a different colored tool. The solution is to stay relevant in the communication and staying valuable in the communication.
Fantastic. I think that's a really great point. I love that.
I have to tell you, part of on Martina's point here is tell me when and tell me where else you're going to get that multi-direction communication through all the levels of management, but also across an organization. That is all you're going to, the only tool you can do that in is Yammer.
And I love the concept of when the network's alive, it's alive. I think that's brilliant. Look, I think that's actually a really good point to park sort of the conversation between us. What I'd really love to hear is some questions and thoughts from the audience. So any observations, questions, abuse, just chuck it out there, please. Kai.
He could come to you or you could use the mic.
So a lot of you talked about groups that users created on their own, interest-based groups. You were talking about all the groups you have at EY. Was there any negative executive feedback, any concern that was expressed over having these non-work-focused groups, as I have had in my organization?
So by the time I adopted Yammer, I'd already gone through a journey with a different social platform that some of us in the audience might be familiar with. So it was easy for me to say that, well, we ran this other tool for 5 years and we didn't have those problems. So when we transitioned, it was easy. Now, go back in time, was there a concern around it? There was, because we'd never done anything like that before. But in that particular case, we had a very strong executive champion who the openness, and he was buying into all of that enterprise 2.0 social, Kool-Aid. And so we didn't set it up with, restrictions or anything like that. And so that was really a good way to get it started. So if you can find a champion, that obviously would be the best way to kind of address that. I know that's hard sometimes.
Thanks. Other questions? Kai, you had one.
The panel's thought about open versus closed groups. When to use what and what gets in the way of knowledge sharing.
So in our network, we have a mixture of private and public groups. We've not fully rolled out Teams at EY, so in a lot of ways we've had to use some of our private small groups as a team because we just haven't fully rolled out Teams. And sometimes you need a very small group of people to work together, and Yammer was our tool to do that in. We used private groups for that. We have big, giant global groups where we're sharing let's say the power and utilities group, for example, that might have 13,000 or 15,000 people in it who are the sector that supports power and utilities. It's a big, wide open, public, global group where the leader is engaged in and maybe posting news, or they post the latest win that we've gotten with a client, or maybe someone's posted a question about, I'm doing this new project for the first time. Does anybody have any experience with X, Y, or Z? That's big, wide open public group. But we also have a whole series of private groups that supports that larger group. So there's like an executive team that they all have their own little group where they talk about what they're going to share in that other the big, wide open public group, or they've got smaller subsector kind of private groups that might roll back up into the overall group. We find that in that experience, sometimes people are a little bit more comfortable sharing what they know in a smaller private group than they are sharing in a big, wide open 15,000 group. Just that's anecdotal. I know that Swoop has done some analytics on this. I'd love to know more about all that. We don't have that kind of level of analytics that you do from all of your group, Kai. But anecdotally, I have seen people be much more willing to offer really what do I want to say? What's the word? Candid advice when it's a private small group of 15 or 25 people that they wouldn't necessarily share with 15,000 until it's been okayed by the leader, or until they feel comfortable doing it, or maybe they're new to using the tool. So in my experience, it's good to have a mixture of both to benefit those people who may feel vulnerable posting in big, wide open space, but also allow for the rest of the organization to see the value of sharing your knowledge widely.
So I've kind of had a little bit of an evolution in my thought about public and private groups as a person who now supports both Yammer and Teams. One of the main regrets that I had when I first kicked off my Yammer network, looking back on it a few years later, was that I felt like I should have more strongly encouraged all the people adopting this new tool to default public. And instead, most people's instinct is to default private, simply because this is a new behavior and a new skill for them, and they don't want people seeing them, flailing around as they figure it out. I feel like I should have been a little bit more insistent and a little more supportive on that. And now that my network has reached a certain level of maturity, if someone were to come to me and say, Mel, help me set up, a Yammer private group, well, it doesn't happen very often because now people know they can set up their own groups. But I think I would actually push back and say, if you feel like your group should be private, I think you should be using Teams. And that is because the discoverability and the transparency is core to the value of the Yammer network. And if you really feel like you need a private container, I really think that Teams would be a better solution for you. And I would probably push back against a request for a private Yammer group, because I don't see the point as much anymore with the way the suite has moved.
That's a great point. Kevin, did you want to say something on?
She basically said, she said what I was going to say.
We've got a question just here.
Question about Yam Jams. So when we launched Yammer, one of the ways that we tried to promote it was through a Yam Jam, and I think it was Ask Our CIO Anything. I think we had an hour or two that we devoted to him. We've only done a couple, and they've all been pretty much flops. So from your guys' perspective, is it time to do a Yam Jam at the beginning when you're trying to get people to buy in? We thought that would draw people into the network for them to see value. Or once the network is more mature, is that when you guys have seen more successful Yam Jams? And how did you promote it to make them successful?
Yeah. I'll start, and then, first it was more focused around the topic, to be honest. So I think definitely you can do them as engagement activities and starting up new communities. But when we've done them, it was around we need to get our employees engaged around a specific topic, or to share that information out or get feedback from them on that topic. So our example is around our off-campus work from home population. So we started a formal program a couple of years ago where people could work from home and after getting permission from their manager. But then people weren't sure, well, what are the rules around that? How do I sign up? What are some best practices? How do I stay healthy? How do I stay connected? And so we use the Yam Jam to answer those questions and get feedback for the program managers to help evolve the program. So for us, it was more around a need versus an event.
I think Lonnie's giving you some very good advice there about that it can often be as much about what you want to talk about and how important that is to employees that might help drive a successful Yam Jam. But I would also tend to think that if you look at your culture, especially if this is a C-suite level Yam Jam, CEO, COO, that sort of thing, really stepping back and saying, how is this leader regarded in the organization? Because I actually launched my Yammer network with a Yam Jam. And that was on purpose because our CIO at the time was this Brazilian leader with a personality as big as a house, where he would, like use 2 languages in the same sentence and talk about football, and, and everyone loved this man. And seriously, just for the opportunity to talk to him, people would have gone to much worse places than Yammer, So that gave us a really good strong start. But I'm thinking of the other end of the spectrum now, and I'm thinking about a particular leader that I had who was uniquely reluctant to take part in any such activity. It felt too press conference, too high stress for him. But people really wanted to escalate questions and talk to this leader. He was still a very charismatic guy. What we did is we set up a Yammer group for him where it was, leaders' names channel. And what happened was we guaranteed to employees that if you posted a question or a comment in that Yammer group, this leader would answer you. It might take within 1 work week, but we followed up, and that leader answered every post in that Yammer group. And that gave him the sense of control and that sense of comfort that he really wanted. And eventually we did do a Yam Jam with him, because after about 1.5 years of this, he was comfortable like taking that step and answering questions live, because that was just an incremental change. And everyone who had already become fans of posting to him in his group joined for the Yam Jam, and it was a very successful event.
In our network, we have Yam Jams for big and small things. And one example is when we have rolled out an internal tool that we built, and it was really just for the knowledge organization at first. We held a half-hour live Skype meeting where the leader presented what it was that they were rolling out, and then for the Q&A portion, where you can't possibly have 1,000 people asking questions on a phone line, we used the last half hour of the meeting for a Yam Jam, where people were encouraged to have their put their questions with this hashtag in this Yammer group, and the team of people supporting that rollout of that tool was able to respond to those questions. And we used the questions that came up in that series. We actually did a whole series of them around every tool that we rolled out. We used the questions that we gathered in those Yam Jams as the basis for our frequently asked questions that we built for the whole organization when we rolled it out organization-wide. So we used, you don't have to make a Yam Jam just have a Yam Jam, just have a Yam Jam. We had a Yam Jam for a reason, because we needed to gather the FAQs. We needed to build our knowledge base around a particular thing. And so that's how one of the ways that we've used Yam Jams is have the meeting first, have your Q&A in Yammer, and then it's all captured and available for later on.
Hi, first time, long time. Thanks for being on the panel. So we've been talking a lot about the notion of inner loop, outer loop. Martina, you had a great example of the universe and neighborhoods. That was really good. But I think it's one thing for all of us to understand those analogies in this room, but then communicating that out to the edges of organizations. There's not enough of us to communicate that message. So do you have any practical tips for how you're communicating the message around kind of the value that Yammer brings, the value that Teams brings, and are you doing that through leading out through behaviors and showing people, or can you talk a little bit about that?
I've got a really short example that I use all the time, and that's why it's really short. Is if I'm trying to help people understand the difference, like between Teams, which is inner loop, and Yammer, which is outer loop, without ever saying the word loop, I literally just say, okay, so if I'm working with my teammates on a Power BI dash, we're in Teams. If I have a question for Cargill's Power BI community, which is 11,000 people, I'm in Yammer. And that right there helps people understand that it's a question of both closeness and scale.
That's a great one. Thank you. We've got 2 more questions.
Hi, two questions. One about ERGs, for those of you who have them. Do you need to have monitoring of any kind? I can just imagine there being political groups that pop up, or strong opinions, or even things that push the envelope of corporate policies. Just curious how you guys handle that.
For ours, we haven't had the situation come up yet. But we do have our community managers that manage the group. So the network tends to police itself. So Yammer, just like any other corporate tool, is governed by our social media policy, our employee handbook. So we treat each other the way we would treat each other in person, in the network as well. So if someone were to go off in left field, there would be some type of consequence, or the community would say, hey, that's not cool. But we haven't had, I'm just thinking like religion or political things that are hot topics. We haven't had a lot of conversations that come up that aren't celebratory. So there'll be around certain holidays, whatever the religion is, someone may post happy XYZ, and it's just people chiming in and, you know, agreeing with that. It hasn't been anything that's been controversial, but the community in general tends to police itself, aligning to the company guidelines.
Consistently? Okay.
Yeah, and also another advice is handle that kind of information the same way you handle it in other tools, because there's no difference. Mm-hmm. If it's written in an email or told through a telephone call or told in Yammer.
So got one more question.
Oh, no, you know what? Hang on one second here, because I actually have had experience with this, and I actually had to modify my company policy. So my company's policy was actually expressed in a single page that we called the etiquette guide, you know, which had the do's before the don'ts, you know, and that sort of thing. And one of the things that we wrote was to ask people in the don'ts is we asked people to please avoid talking about religion or politics, simply because, as we wrote, these are sensitive subjects for many people. And the thing is what happened is we were challenged on this policy by an ERG, which was for our company Christians. They wanted the right to post in Yammer and have a Yammer group, and they came to us and said, well, we really want to have our own Yammer group. And we sat down and had a very respectful discussion. I asked, are you looking to have a sense of community? Are you willing to welcome people? That's a very broad religious category. Are you going to be welcoming of all who self-identify, even if you wouldn't identify? And also, one of the things I asked, and I did not expect them necessarily to say yes, but they did, and it's turned out to be a good accommodation. I asked them to please make that a private group, so that they then would admit people into the group, they would run that group, and they would decide who should then be inside and outside of that container, and only escalate serious issues to me, because I'm not aware of where the boundaries are and what the hot topics are in that interest community. And so I did remove that line from our one-page company policy. And we are simply lucky that we have not run into it again, but it has turned out to actually be a very smooth experience that I was nervous about at first.
That's a good one. One last question.
Thanks. We are just now getting into the possibility of looking at Yammer, and this is really a technical question. Someone asked, can the content be pulled into SharePoint so we don't lose that as it's rolled off and as, you know, folks look at it and, you know, and then move on to something else? Is that content something that you just lose, or is it saved somewhere? And if so, where?
Yeah. So the messages stay there unless you specifically set up some sort of process to kill the old ones, which is one of the benefits of Yammer, is that I can go back to an old message from 2 years ago and resurface it or find the answer or whatever the case may be. Like many tools, the most frequent recent stuff is kind of what is on people's minds, but you know, it's there. You know, Microsoft has done a lot of good stuff in terms of bringing Yammer into SharePoint with some of the announcements that we'll hear more specifically about tomorrow morning at the roadmap session, and you know, previously as well. So bringing, and also with Teams, so bringing good hooks to bring Yammer visibility into some of these other tools. But technically those messages don't go away unless you set something up for them to make them go away. And I wouldn't recommend it.
And also, I promote my own session on Thursday. It's around security and Yammer and administration and Yammer, and we talk about Office 365 connected groups with Yammer and explain where the content is stored.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Look, that's all we've got time for. I know there's more questions, and pretty confident that our MVP panel is going to hang around afterwards. So if you've got anything, you can come up. But if we just thank them for their time and yeah. Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you, Scott.